The first thing I registered was warmth, a kind of encompassing heat that wasn't mine. It was a soft, deep warmth, like the lingering heat from a summer sun on stone, but somehow much closer. Too close, in fact. My eyes weren't open yet, but my other senses were slowly, reluctantly, coming online. There was the faint, comforting scent of sandalwood and something else, a citrusy freshness that wasn't exactly cologne, but more like a residual shampoo or body wash. And then the sound. A soft, rhythmic exhale and inhale. Incredibly steady, incredibly near. Panic didn't quite set in. Not yet. It was more like a slow, creeping wave of utter confusion. I was on a couch. That much I knew. A slightly lumpy, surprisingly comfortable couch in someone else's living room. But the couch, for all its accommodating nature, wasn't this warm, nor did it breathe. Slowly, carefully, I cracked an eyelid. The room was bathed in the muted, pearlescent light of early morning, filtering through thin blinds. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light, making the air seem alive. And there it was. Or rather, he was. Liam. His face was an inch from mine, maybe less, so close I could see the almost imperceptible flutter of his eyelashes, the faint stubble along his jawline, the tiny, almost invisible scar just above his left eyebrow that I hadn't noticed before. His lips, slightly parted, were full and soft, and I could feel the faint puff of his breath against my cheek with every rhythmic one of his arms was draped across my chest, heavy and possessive, and my own arm was tucked awkwardly underneath me, pinning me against the back of the couch. Our legs were tangled, his knee nudging intimately against mine. We were essentially spooning, just sideways on a couch that was definitely not designed for two grown men to sleep on, let alone in such an entangled fashion. My breath hitched. A rush of adrenaline, sharp and cold, shot through me, instantly dispelling the last vestiges of sleep. How? How had this happened? My mind, usually a well-oiled machine of rational thought, scrambled, grasping for an explanation. The previous night was a blur, a delightful, hazy blur of laughter, cheap wine, and a surprisingly good playlist at Sarah's housewarming. Liam had been there, of course, Sarah's cousin, or something like that. We'd met a few times before, always in social settings, always with a polite nod and a brief, surface-level conversation. He was the kind of guy who effortlessly commanded a room, not loudly, but with a quiet charisma that drew people in. Dark, wavy hair that always seemed to fall just right, eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. A build that suggested he actually went to the gym more than just to cancel his membership. He was, objectively, attractive. But never in my wildest imaginings had I thought we'd end up in a situation like this. I remembered the last part of the night. Sarah's apartment, for all its charm, was a good 40-minute drive from my place. I'd had a few too many glasses of that surprisingly drinkable Merlot, and my usual Uber-summoning finger felt paralyzed. Liam, ever the gentleman, had offered his spare couch. "It's barely 10 minutes from here," he'd said, his voice a low rumble, a reassuring presence in the chaotic aftermath of the party. "No point driving all that way when you're half asleep." I'd mumbled my thanks, a bit mortified, but also immensely grateful. I remembered stumbling into his pristine, minimalist apartment, vaguely noting the scent of lemon and clean linen, and collapsing onto what I now realized was the couch. I hadn't even made it to the bedroom he probably had. I'd just folded onto the sofa, my head hitting the cushion with a thud, and oblivion had claimed me. But at what point had he joined me? And why? My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Every instinct screamed at me to bolt, to untangle myself from this embarrassing intimacy, to pretend it had never happened. But the rational part of my brain, the one that managed my work projects and balanced my checkbook, was fascinated. This wasn't just awkward, it was something else. Something warm and curiously soft. I shifted infinitesimally, trying to create a millimeter of distance without waking him. His arm, heavy on my chest, didn't budge. He let out a soft snuffle, and his breath, still warm, tickled my ear. I could feel the faint thrum of his heartbeat against my side. It was an overwhelming sensory experience, a full-body immersion in Liam, and I was surprisingly, shamefully, not entirely repulsed. A part of me, a very quiet, very deep part, was enjoying the warmth, the closeness, the sheer undeniable presence of another person. Especially this person. This was a bad idea. A very, very bad idea. He was a relative stranger, a friend of a friend, and now we were essentially spooning on his sofa like we'd been married for years. What was he going to think? What was I going to think? Just as I was mentally drafting my apology, "So sorry, I must have sleepwalked onto your side of the couch," Liam stirred. A slow, languid stretch that rippled through his body, making my own involuntarily tense. His arm tightened around me for a moment, a casual, comfortable embrace, before loosening. His eyes fluttered open, dark and heavy with sleep. For a split, the first thing I registered was warmth, a kind of encompassing heat that wasn't mine. It was a soft, deep warmth, like the lingering heat from a summer sun on stone, but somehow much closer. Too close, in fact. My eyes weren't open yet, but my other senses were slowly, reluctantly, coming online. There was the faint, comforting scent of sandalwood and something else, a citrusy freshness that wasn't exactly cologne, but more like a residual shampoo or body wash. And then the sound. A soft, rhythmic exhale and inhale, incredibly steady, incredibly near. Panic didn't quite set in, not yet. It was more like a slow, creeping wave of utter confusion. I was on a couch. That much I knew. A slightly lumpy, surprisingly comfortable couch in someone else's living room. But the couch, for all its accommodating nature, wasn't this warm, nor did it breathe. Slowly, carefully, I cracked an eyelid. The room was bathed in the muted, pearlescent light of early morning, filtering through thin blinds. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light, making the air seem alive. And there it was. Or rather, he was. Liam. His face was an inch from mine, maybe less. So close I could see the almost imperceptible flutter of his eyelashes, the faint stubble along his jawline, the tiny, almost invisible scar just above his left eyebrow that I hadn't noticed before. His lips, slightly parted, were full and soft, and I could feel the faint puff of his breath against my cheek with every rhythmic one of his arms was draped across my chest, heavy and possessive, and my own arm was tucked awkwardly underneath me, pinning me against the back of the couch. Our legs were tangled, his knee nudging intimately against mine. We were essentially spooning, just sideways on a couch that was definitely not designed for two grown men to sleep on, let alone in such an entangled fashion. My breath hitched. A rush of adrenaline, sharp and cold, shot through me, instantly dispelling the last vestiges of sleep. How? How had this happened? My mind, usually a well-oiled machine of rational thought, scrambled, grasping for an explanation. The previous night was a blur, a delightful, hazy blur of laughter, cheap wine, and a surprisingly good playlist at Sarah's housewarming. Liam had been there, of course, Sarah's cousin, or something like that. We'd met a few times before, always in social settings, always with a polite nod and a brief, surface-level conversation. He was the kind of guy who effortlessly commanded a room, not loudly, but with a quiet charisma that drew people in. Dark, wavy hair that always seemed to fall just right, eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. A build that suggested he actually went to the gym more than just to cancel his membership. He was, objectively, attractive. But never in my wildest imaginings had I thought we'd end up in a situation like this. I remembered the last part of the night. Sarah's apartment, for all its charm, was a good 40-minute drive from my place. I'd had a few too many glasses of that surprisingly drinkable Merlot, and my usual Uber-summoning finger felt paralyzed. Liam, ever the gentleman, had offered his spare couch. "It's barely 10 minutes from here," he'd said, his voice a low rumble, a reassuring presence in the chaotic aftermath of the party. "No point driving all that way when you're half asleep." I'd mumbled my thanks. a bit mortified, but also immensely grateful. I remembered stumbling into his pristine, minimalist apartment, vaguely noting the scent of lemon and clean linen, and collapsing onto what I now realized was the couch. I hadn't even made it to the bedroom he probably had. I just folded onto the sofa, my head hitting the cushion with a thud, and oblivion had claimed me. But at what point had he joined me? And why? My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Every instinct screamed at me to bolt, to untangle myself from this embarrassing intimacy, to pretend it had never happened. But the rational part of my brain, the one that managed my work projects and balanced my checkbook, he returned a few minutes later, carrying 2 steaming mugs. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, a welcome assault on my still sleepy senses. He handed me a mug, our fingers brushing for a brief electric moment that sent a shiver down my spine. I quickly retracted my hand, clutching the warm ceramic like a lifeline. "Black? 2 sugars, right?" he asked, settling back onto the other end of the couch, maintaining a respectable distance this time. My eyes widened. "How did you know?" He chuckled, a rich, warm sound that made my chest feel a little fluttery. "Sarah mentioned it once, at that barbecue a few months ago, said you were very particular about your coffee, and I happen to have a good memory for details." He winked. A small, surprised smile touched my lips. Of all the things he could remember, he remembered that? It was such a small, insignificant detail, yet the fact that he retained it and then used it sent a peculiar warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the coffee. "Well, you remember correctly," I admitted, taking a grateful sip. "The coffee was excellent, strong and smooth, exactly how I liked it." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, sipping our coffee, the lingering awkwardness of our morning encounter slowly dissipating, replaced by a tentative ease. The early morning light grew brighter, painting the room in hues of soft gold. I found myself stealing glances at him over the rim of my mug. He was wearing an old, faded t-shirt that stretched across his chest and a pair of equally faded sweatpants that somehow still managed to look good on him. His dark hair was a beautiful mess, and a faint indent from the couch cushion still creased his cheek. He looked utterly human, completely unposed, and incredibly appealing. "So," he began, breaking the quiet, "what are your plans for the day? Need a ride anywhere?" "Oh, no, I'm good," I said quickly. "I've got my car parked just down the street, actually. Managed to Uber back to it last night after Sarah's." I had, technically. It was more like I'd gotten an Uber near my car, then stumbled the last block. Details. "Good man," he nodded approvingly. "Responsible even when inebriated." I laughed. "I try, it doesn't always work out." I thought about what I had to do today. Laundry, groceries, the usual Sunday grind. But suddenly, those mundane tasks felt impossibly dull compared to, well, to sitting here drinking coffee with Liam. "Listen," I started, "about this morning. I'm really sorry if I encroached on your space. I honestly don't know how I ended up so close." It felt important to clear the air, even if he'd already offered his own explanation. He held up a hand. "Hey, no need to apologize, Hudson. Seriously, I told you, I was out like a light. Probably just rolled over in my sleep. Or you did. These couches aren't exactly king-sized beds, are they?" He gave me a reassuring smile. Besides, it was a long night. Happens. No harm done. His casual acceptance, his lack of embarrassment, was disarming. It made me feel relieved, yes, but also a little disappointed. A tiny irrational part of me wanted there to be more to it. Wanted him to admit that maybe, just maybe, he hadn't accidentally rolled over. But that was a ridiculous thought, born of a few too many lingering gazes and a surprise dose of morning intimacy. "Still," I insisted, "thanks for the couch and the coffee. It was a lifesaver." "Any time," he said, and there was a subtle emphasis on the word, a warmth that suggested he actually meant it. "Seriously, if you're ever stuck again, you know where to find a surprisingly comfortable hand-me-down from my grandma." We chatted for a bit longer, the conversation flowing easily now, touching on everything from Sarah's notoriously wild parties to the upcoming local elections. I learned that he was an architect, specializing in sustainable design, which explained the minimalist yet earthy feel of his apartment. He talked about his passion for hiking and his dream of designing a net zero energy home. I found myself genuinely engaged, listening intently, asking questions, feeling a connection that went beyond superficial small talk. He was intelligent, thoughtful, and genuinely passionate about his work. It was clear that he wasn't just another pretty face. As the morning progressed, the sun climbed higher, flooding the living room with bright, clear light. The comfortable bubble we'd created, however, felt like it was nearing its natural end. I had things to do, and so I assumed, did he? "Well," I said, finally setting down my empty mug, "I should probably get going. My car's probably wondering where I've been." He nodded, a slight wistfulness in his eyes that I might have imagined. "Right, the responsibilities of Sunday." He stood up, stretching again, his frame silhouetted against the window. "It was good seeing you, Hudson, despite the unconventional start to the day." I smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes. "Yeah, it was. Thanks again, Liam." I retrieved my phone and wallet from the coffee table, where I must have placed them last night. As I made my way to the door, Liam followed, his presence a warm anchor behind me. "You drive safe," he said, opening the door. I turned to face him, standing in the doorway. He was taller than me, and the angle made me feel a little bit exposed. "I will," I promised. I hesitated, a sudden impulse to say something more, something that would bridge the gap between this morning's intimacy and the polite farewell. Maybe we could grab coffee again sometime when it's, not a result of me passing out on your couch." A slow smile spread across his face, lighting up his eyes. "I'd like that, Hudson. I'd like that very much." He reached out, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought he was going to touch my arm or my shoulder. Instead, his hand brushed lightly against the doorframe next to my head, a casual gesture that still managed to send a jolt through me. "I'll text you." "Okay," I said, perhaps a little too eagerly. "Great." Stepping out into the cool morning air, the sunlight felt sharper, the world suddenly more vibrant. I walked down the short path to the sidewalk, and only when I reached my car did I allow myself to glance back. Liam was still standing in his doorway, watching me. He offered a small wave, and I returned it, feeling an odd lightness in my chest, a giddy, unfamiliar sensation that had nothing to do with the coffee and everything to do with the man standing in the doorway of the house I'd just left. The drive home was a blur of replays. Every moment of our morning together, from the startling proximity to his casual invitation for coffee, played on a loop in my mind. His scent, the warmth of his body, the low rumble of his voice, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. Every detail was magnified, scrutinized, and savored. I pulled into my driveway, the mundane reality of my quiet street a stark contrast to the vivid memories of Liam's apartment. I killed the engine, but didn't move. I just sat there, my hands resting on the steering wheel, my mind awash in a confusing swirl of emotions. It was more than just attraction, though that was certainly there, undeniable and potent. It was also a sense of unexpected connection, a feeling of being truly seen and heard, even in the midst of a ridiculously awkward situation. He hadn't judged me. He hadn't made it weird. Not really. He had simply accepted the situation with a calm grace that was both admirable and, frankly, incredibly attractive. I thought about his hand on the doorframe, how close it had been to me, and the lingering phantom sensation on my arm that hadn't even been touched. I thought about how naturally our conversation had flowed, how I'd felt instantly at ease with him, despite our limited history. And then, inevitably, my mind circled back to the couch, to his warmth, his breath, the silent intimacy of that shared space. He said he rolled over. He said he was just tired. He said it was an accident. And I wanted to believe him. I did, but there was a small, insistent voice in the back of my head, a hopeful, mischievous whisper that wondered if maybe, just maybe, it hadn't been entirely accidental. wondered if he had felt that spark too, even in his sleep. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the fanciful notions. This was Hudson overthinking things as usual. It was a one-off, an amusing anecdote for Sarah's next party. He was being polite. He was being a good host. But then, why the careful memory of my coffee order? Why the lingering gaze from his doorway? Why did his "I'll text you" sound less like a polite platitude and more like a promise? I finally got out of the car, retrieved my bag from the passenger seat, and made my way into my quiet apartment. The silence felt deafening after the morning's unexpected intimacy. I showered, trying to wash away the lingering scents of stale clothes and cheap wine, but the scent of sandalwood and citrus, Liam's scent, seemed stubbornly etched into my memory. As I dressed in fresh clothes, my mind continued its relentless analysis. I had always been cautious in relationships, preferring slow burns to sudden sparks. My last serious relationship had ended amicably, but it had left me wary, a little more guarded than before. I wasn't one to dive headfirst into something, especially not something that started with a literal entanglement on a couch. But this felt different. It wasn't a casual hookup, nor was it a carefully planned first date. It was an accidental intimacy, a vulnerability exposed and handled with a surprising tenderness. It was real, messy, and utterly unexpected. And that, in itself, was exhilarating. I made myself a quick breakfast, but my appetite felt strangely absent. All I could taste was coffee. All I could hear was Liam's low laugh. All I could feel was the ghost of his arm on my chest. This was ridiculous. I was acting like a lovesick teenager, not a 32-year-old man with a mortgage and a demanding career. I pulled out my phone, unlocking it. No new messages. Of course not. He said he'd text. He didn't say he'd text immediately. Patience, Hudson. Patience. But patience wasn't something I was known for, especially when something, or someone, had completely upended my carefully constructed routine. This morning had been a disruption, a pleasant, unsettling jolt to my system. It had opened a door I hadn't even realized was there, a door to possibilities I hadn't dared to imagine. I spent the rest of the day in a hazy state, alternating between productivity and distracted daydreaming. I did my laundry, but folded a shirt inside out twice. I went to the grocery store, but forgot half the items on my list. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leaped, only to sink again when it was just a work email or a notification from a news app. As evening approached, a familiar sense of longing began to settle in. It wasn't just a longing for the person, but a longing for the unexpected, for the feeling of being surprised and intrigued. It was a longing for that peculiar warmth, that shared breath, that sense of a world shrinking down to just two people on a too small couch. I sat on my own, perfectly sized, perfectly solitary couch, staring blankly at the TV. My apartment, usually a sanctuary of calm, now felt strangely empty. I thought about Liam's apartment, with its books and guitar, its quiet warmth. I wondered what he was doing right now. Was he thinking about me? Or was I just another forgotten couch sleeper in a long line of them? The logical part of my brain insisted on the latter. He was a kind, generous guy. He offered his couch. He was probably just being friendly. And the coffee invitation? Just a polite formality. But the hopeful, mischievous whisper from earlier returned, stronger this time. What if it wasn't just politeness? What if that tiny, almost imperceptible shift, closer on the couch, that lingering gaze, that carefully remembered coffee order, meant something more? I knew one thing for sure. My quiet, predictable world had been gently, but irrevocably, nudged off its axis. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where it would land. I just hoped it wouldn't be too far from Liam. The thought of that text message, that tiny ping that could bridge the gap from morning's awkward embrace to something more, kept me on edge, suspended in a delicate balance between anticipation and fear. The day had started with an invasion of my personal space and ended with an invasion of my thoughts. And honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted either of them to leave. The coffee tasted like ash, even though I'd paid an absurd amount for it at the trendy little spot just a few blocks from Liam's apartment. I was trying to focus on the news scrolling across my phone screen, something about an obscure political spat, but my mind kept drifting back, replaying the morning on a loop. Liam, so close, his breath a soft current against my cheek, the warmth radiating from him an undeniable presence. It had been more than just a spatial coincidence. It had felt intentional. Or maybe that was just my overactive imagination, desperate to find meaning in every fleeting touch. I'd bolted out of there pretty quickly, trying to play it cool. "Thanks again for the couch, Liam. Really saved my bacon," I'd mumbled, grabbing my jacket. He'd just smiled, that easy, slightly lopsided grin, and said, "Anytime, Hudson. Seriously, glad I could help." There was no discernible awkwardness from him, which only made me wonder if I was the one making a mountain out of a molehill. But the image of his eyes, so close to mine, still vivid, told a different story. Or, at least, my hopeful heart wanted it to. I spent the rest of that day in a haze, jumping at every notification on my phone, half expecting, half dreading a text from him. Nothing came. By evening, I was back in my own apartment, the familiar silence feeling heavier than usual. My place, usually a sanctuary, now felt stark, a little lonely. Had I gotten used to the quiet hum of Liam's presence, the subtle scent of his home, cedar and something vaguely citrusy? My usual evening routine, cooking a simple meal, catching up on a show, maybe reading a bit, felt utterly bland. I kept replaying our conversations from the night before, trying to dissect every word, every laugh. Had he been flirting? Or was that just his natural charm? He was handsome, no doubt about it. The kind of effortless good looks that didn't scream for attention but subtly commanded it. Dark, slightly unruly hair, eyes that seemed to hold a quiet intelligence, and a smile that reached them. And that lean build, which I'd become intimately aware of when he was practically spooning me on his too small couch. The next day didn't bring any answers either. I threw myself into work, a deluge of emails and project deadlines, but Liam's face kept popping into my head, an unwelcome, yet strangely cherished, distraction. By lunchtime, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed a reason, any reason, to reach out. I scrolled through my mental inventory of things I might have left at his place. My phone charger? No, that was in my bag. My keys? Definitely not. My dignity? Probably, but I couldn't exactly text him asking for that back. Then it hit me. My reusable coffee cup. I'd had it with me when I arrived, and I distinctly remembered setting it on his kitchen counter before we started drinking wine. It was a rather mundane item, but perfectly plausible. A good, solid excuse. My thumb hovered over his name in my contacts. Liam. What if he thought I was being weird? What if he'd moved on, completely forgotten about the accidental cuddle, and my text would just remind him of the imposition? My palms felt sweaty. This was ridiculous. I was a grown man. I'd been on plenty of dates, navigated tricky social situations. Why was this so different? It was different because it felt unplanned, unscripted, like something genuinely meaningful might be trying to sprout, and I was terrified of trampling it. Taking a deep breath, I typed, "Hey Liam, it's Hudson. Hope you're having a good week. I think I left my travel coffee mug at your place. No rush at all, just thought I'd check." It felt bland, safe, non-committal, the perfect amount of casual indifference. I hit send, then immediately regretted it. Now I'd have to wait. The agonizing wait. My phone buzzed 10 minutes later. I practically jumped out of my skin. "Hey Hudson, yep, it's here, sitting on my counter, looking lonely, happy to leave it out for you whenever you're passing by, or I can drop it off sometime. No problem at all." My heart did a little flutter. He replied quickly, and he offered to drop it off. That meant he was willing to see me again, or maybe he was just being polite. I tried to temper my enthusiasm. "Oh, great, thanks so much. I could swing by after work today, if that works for you." "Around 5:30? Totally understand if that's not a good time, though." Again, trying to keep it light, give him an out. 5:30 works perfectly. See you then." A small, genuine smile finally spread across my face. Okay, so I was seeing Liam again, for a coffee mug. But it was a start. The afternoon crawled by at a glacial pace. I tried to focus on my spreadsheets, but my mind was already imagining the encounter. What would I wear? What would we talk about? Would it be awkward? Would he still have that subtle scent of cedar and citrus? By 5:15, I was practically vibrating. I'd changed my shirt 3 times, finally settling on a dark blue button-up that I hoped made me look casually put together. Not like I'd just stepped out of a fashion magazine. A quick check in the mirror, a mental pep talk. "You're just picking up a mug, Hudson. A mug." And I was out the door. Liam's building looked the same, unassuming, but well-maintained. I rang his buzzer, my stomach doing a nervous flip. The familiar static of the intercom, then his voice, clear and warm. "Hey, Hudson, come on up." The door to his apartment was ajar when I reached the landing. I pushed it open gently, stepping inside. Liam was standing in his living room, a glass of water in his hand, a casual gray t-shirt and jeans, making him look even more approachable than usual. The afternoon sun streamed through his windows, illuminating dust motes, dancing in the air, and casting a golden glow on his face. He looked good. Really good. "Hey," he said, that easy smile unfolding. "Glad you found an excuse to come back." My breath hitched. He knew. He totally knew my coffee mug was just an excuse. My face flushed, but I managed to laugh. Guilty as charged. It was a very important coffee mug, you understand. He chuckled, and the sound was like warm honey. "Of course. Let me get it for you." He gestured towards the kitchen, but didn't move. Instead, he just looked at me, a genuine warmth in his eyes that made my heart feel like it was expanding in my chest. "You okay? You seem a little tense." "Oh, just a long day," I lied, shifting my weight. "You know how it is." "I do," he said, taking a sip of water. "Listen, since you're here, do you want to stick around for a bit? I was just about to start making dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta. But I made too much, as usual." He gestured vaguely at a pot on his stove, even though I could see no sign of actual cooking having started yet. It was a transparently sweet ploy. My first instinct was to say no, to keep my distance, to protect myself from whatever complicated feelings were starting to bubble up. But then I looked at his face, the open invitation in his eyes, and something in me softened. "Actually, yeah," I found myself saying. "I'd really like that, if you're sure I wouldn't be intruding." "Never," he said. And the way he said it, so simple and sincere, made a little thrill run through me. "Come on in. You can supervise my questionable cooking skills." I followed him into the kitchen, the space feeling familiar now. My coffee mug sat innocently on the counter. He picked it up and handed it to me, our fingers brushing lightly. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through me. I held onto the mug, suddenly unsure what to do with it. "So, what's the plan?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "Pasta with a quick tomato sauce," he said, pulling out a cutting board and a basket of Roma tomatoes, "and maybe some fresh basil if I remember to snip some from my balcony garden." He started chopping garlic with a practiced ease, and I found myself leaning against the counter, watching him. There was something incredibly appealing about watching someone do something ordinary, something domestic, with such focus. The way his brow furrowed slightly, the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of the knife. "Can I help?" I offered, wanting to feel useful, to participate. "Actually, yeah," he said, glancing up with a smile. "You can wash these tomatoes, and try not to eat them all before they make it into the sauce." I took the bowl of tomatoes, the smooth, cool skin against my fingers. We fell into a comfortable rhythm, me washing vegetables, him chopping, the occasional exchange about our day, or about some random topic that popped into our heads. We talked about books, about terrible reality TV, about our least favorite chores. It was easy, flowing, like we'd known each other for ages. There was no pressure, no performance, just two guys in a kitchen making dinner. But beneath the surface, for me at least, there was a quiet intensity. Every time his arm brushed mine as he reached for a spice, every time our eyes met and held for a fraction of a second longer than strictly necessary, I felt it. That spark, that unspoken connection. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. He asked me about my work, and I found myself opening up about the challenges of my job in marketing, the creative frustrations, the moments of unexpected joy. He listened intently, nodding, asking thoughtful questions. He didn't interrupt or offer unsolicited advice, just absorbed what I was saying. It felt good, being truly heard. Then it was my turn to ask about him. So, what exactly do you do, Liam? You mentioned design, but what kind? He paused, stirring the simmering tomato sauce, the rich aroma filling the air. I'm an architectural designer, he said. Mostly residential, some small commercial projects. I love it, even with the long hours and the clients who change their minds every 5 minutes. He chuckled. It's about bringing ideas to life, shaping spaces, creating places where people feel good. That sounds amazing, I said, genuinely impressed. So you're literally building people's dreams. Something like that, he said, a modest shrug. It's fulfilling, but also, a job. Not always as glamorous as it sounds. He paused, then looked at me, a playful glint in his eye. But enough about my boring life. What's your biggest dream, Hudson? If you could do anything, no limits, what would it be? The question caught me off guard. Most people don't ask that. Most conversations skim the surface. I thought about it for a moment, letting the warmth of his kitchen and his gentle presence encourage a moment of vulnerability. I've always wanted to write, I admitted, my voice a little softer than usual. Not like a novelist, nothing that grand, but travel writing, maybe, or just short stories. Capturing moments, telling stories about people and places, but it always feels too impractical, too much of a dream and not enough of a plan. Liam put down his spoon, his full attention on me. Why impractical? Writing is a skill, a craft. You clearly have a way with words, even in just talking about your work. And you observe things, I've noticed. That's a writer's eye. His belief in me, unspoken yet palpable, was disarming. Well, it's a big leap from marketing reports to prose, I said, trying to deflect, but a part of me was soaring. Maybe, he conceded, but you never know until you try, right? Anyway, he picked up the spoon again, a subtle shift in his tone. The pasta's ready. You want some wine? Dinner was delicious, simple yet perfect. We ate at his small kitchen island, talking late into the evening. The wine flowed, making the conversation even easier, deeper. We moved from dreams to fears, from light-hearted anecdotes to moments of genuine introspection. He told me about his family, about his parents who were still happily married, his sister who lived overseas. He talked about a past relationship that had ended amicably but taught him a lot about compromise. He was open, unpretentious, and utterly captivating. I found myself sharing things I rarely shared with anyone. The lingering sting of a past heartbreak, the anxieties about getting older, the feeling of sometimes being adrift despite having a successful career. He listened without judgment, his steady gaze making me feel safe. It was the kind of conversation I craved, the kind that built true intimacy, brick by emotional brick. At one point, he asked, "So, you're usually a pretty private guy, aren't you, Hudson?" I almost choked on my wine. Is it that obvious? He smiled, a soft, understanding smile. A little, but you're opening up tonight, and I appreciate that. His words, simple as they were, hit me with an unexpected force. They made me realize just how much I was opening up, how comfortable I felt in his presence. It was a strange sensation, this blend of intense connection and underlying vulnerability. I hadn't felt this way in a long time, maybe ever. The hours melted away. Before I knew it, the sky outside had turned completely dark, and the streetlights cast long shadows into his apartment. I glanced at my watch and gasped. Wow, it's almost midnight. I should really head home. No rush, he said, but he started to clear the plates. Thanks for staying, Hudson. I really enjoyed it. Me too, Liam, more than you know. The words slipped out, unfiltered, heartfelt. He stopped, stacking the plates carefully, and looked at me again. His eyes held a depth I hadn't noticed before, a hint of something unspoken, something mirrored in my own heart. Good, he said softly, and his gaze lingered on mine. The air between us thickened, charged with a quiet electricity. It wasn't the boisterous, playful energy from the day before, but something far more profound. It was the subtle thrum of two souls recognizing each other, tentatively reaching out. I suddenly felt a surge of courage. Liam, I began, my voice a little shaky, that morning, on the couch, he met my gaze directly, no hint of evasiveness. Yeah? You were really close, I said, a faint blush creeping up my neck. I noticed. A small, knowing smile played on his lips. He leaned back against the counter, crossing his arm over his chest. I know, he said, his voice a low rumble. I noticed, too. My heart hammered against my ribs. And what did you make of it? I asked, pushing my luck, needing to know. He hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning my face as if searching for something. Then he uncrossed his arms and took a step closer to me. Just one step, but it felt monumental. I thought, he said, his voice soft, that it felt surprisingly right, and a little like I didn't want to move. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't what I had expected him to say, and yet it was exactly what I had hoped for. The truth, laid bare, simple, and profound. Oh, I managed, my voice barely a whisper. My mind raced, a million thoughts, a million feelings, all swirling together. The fear, the excitement, the vulnerability. He took another step, closing the remaining distance between us. Now he was standing right in front of me, close enough that I could feel the subtle warmth emanating from him again, smell the lingering scent of cedar and spices from his cooking. His hand reached out, gently cupping my cheek. His thumb brushed over my skin, a feather-light touch that sent shivers down my spine. And you, Hudson? He asked, his eyes searching mine, full of a quiet question. What did you make of it? His touch was like a current, grounding me, yet making me feel impossibly light. My mind emptied of all the clever retorts, all the self-deprecating humor I usually relied on. There was only the truth. I felt it too, Liam, I confessed, my voice barely audible, and it's been on my mind ever since. His thumb continued its gentle caress and his gaze softened, a look of tender understanding in his eyes. He leaned in just a fraction, his gaze dropping to my lips. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. This was it. The moment I had been both dreading and desperately wanting. But then he pulled back, only slightly, breaking the intensity of the moment, though his hand remained on my cheek. It wasn't a rejection, but a pause, a moment of consideration, as if he was asking for permission, or just ensuring we were both on the same page. Hudson, he said, his voice a little rougher now, I like you, a lot, more than I probably should, given how little we actually know each other. He gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. But there's something about you, something that makes me want to know everything. My own hand, almost without conscious thought, reached up and covered his on my cheek. I like you too, Liam, I admitted, my gaze locked with his. The honesty felt liberating. A lot. And I want to know everything about you too. A genuine, heartfelt smile bloomed on his face, radiating warmth. He didn't kiss me, not then. He just held my gaze, his thumb still gently stroking my cheek. It was a moment of profound connection, an unspoken agreement, a promise, perhaps, that there was more to explore, more to discover. It's getting late, he finally said, his voice still soft, but with a hint of something new, something hopeful. You probably should get some sleep. I nodded, feeling a lightness in my chest that had nothing to do with the wine. Yeah, I should. He removed his hand from my cheek, and the sudden absence of his touch left a faint chill. He walked me to the door, and as I stepped out, he held my gaze once more. Hudson, he said, his voice low, don't be a stranger, okay? Never, I promised, and this time the word felt heavy with meaning, with a future I was suddenly, thrillingly, eager to explore. I walked down the stairs and out into the cool night air, a giddy smile plastered on my face. The coffee mug was still in my hand, but I'd completely forgotten about it. My heart, however, was full to bursting. I had come for a mug, but I had left with something far more precious: the exhilarating, terrifying, and utterly wonderful possibility of an unspoken connection finally finding its voice. The soft hum of the old coffee maker was the soundtrack to our mornings now, a gentle, domestic rhythm I hadn't realized I was missing until it became a part of my life. It had been a few weeks since that morning on the couch, since I'd woken up with him so close I could feel the warmth of his breath against my cheek, and a lot had changed. We'd settled into a comfortable routine of seeing each other a few times a week, a mix of planned dates and spontaneous meetups. Dinners, movies, long walks through the park that stretched into hours of easy conversation. Every interaction felt like peeling back another layer, discovering new contours of a landscape I was increasingly drawn to explore. But there was still this thing, a shimmering, almost invisible barrier that kept us from truly baring our souls. It wasn't hostility, not even awkwardness anymore, but a kind of respectful distance, a holding back that I recognized in myself just as much as I sensed it in him. We talked about our days, our work, our passions, even some of our pasts in broad strokes, but it felt like skimming the surface of an ocean, while knowing there were entire cities submerged beneath. One Saturday, he suggested we drive out of the city. "There's this old lighthouse," he'd said, leaning against my kitchen counter while I made us coffee, the morning light glinting off his dark hair. "My grandmother used to take me there when I was a kid. It's quiet, and the view is incredible. You might like it." My stomach did a little flip. Taking me to a place with such personal history felt significant. It wasn't just another date. It was an invitation into his past, a glimpse into the boy he once was. "Sounds perfect," I'd replied, trying to keep my voice casual, though my heart was doing a rather uncasual drum solo. The drive was long but beautiful. The city skyline receded in the rearview mirror, replaced by rolling hills, then fields of corn swaying gently in the late summer breeze. We listened to an eclectic mix of music, some indie folk, a surprising amount of 90s hip-hop, and even a classical piece that made the journey feel almost cinematic. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences, where we just absorbed the passing scenery. It felt like we were in our own little bubble, far removed from the pressures and expectations of daily life. As we neared the coast, the air grew cooler, carrying the briny scent of the ocean. The road eventually narrowed, winding through a small, charming town with weathered clapboard houses and fishing boats bobbing in the harbor. Finally, we pulled up to a gravel parking lot overlooking the sea, and there it was, perched majestically on a rocky outcrop, an old lighthouse, its white tower gleaming in the sun. "Wow," I breathed, genuinely impressed. It was exactly as he'd described, timeless and serene. "Told you," he grinned, that easy, genuine smile that still managed to disarm me every single time. We got out of the car, and the wind immediately whipped around us, tugging at my hair and making me pull my jacket tighter. The air was crisp and invigorating, a stark contrast to the humid city. We spent the next hour walking along the cliffs, the waves crashing rhythmically against the rocks below. He pointed out places his grandmother used to sit, recounting snippets of his childhood, stories about collecting seashells, sketching the boats, and imagining himself as a lighthouse keeper, guiding ships through treacherous waters. His voice took on a softer quality as he spoke of her, a warmth that resonated with me. It was a beautiful thing to witness, this unraveling of his personal history. She was an artist, he said, gesturing towards the rugged coastline. She always said this place felt like a living canvas, never the same twice. She sounds wonderful, I offered, genuinely moved. It painted a vivid picture of the kind of person he came from, the roots that anchored him. He nodded, a distant look in his eyes. She was, and tough as nails. Lost her husband young, raised 2 kids alone. She taught me a lot about resilience. He paused, looking out at the vast expanse of the ocean, and about not being afraid to just be. There was a vulnerability in that last statement that caught my attention. It was a crack in the carefully constructed facade of the effortlessly charming, slightly reserved man I knew. I felt a pull, a desire to lean in, to ask more, but also a hesitation. Was it my place? Was he ready to share? We eventually made our way to a small, secluded bench overlooking a particularly scenic cove. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The silence that fell between us wasn't awkward. It was heavy, with unspoken thoughts, with the quiet weight of emotions that had accumulated between us. "You know," he started, breaking the spell, his voice softer than usual. "It's funny how some places just stick with you, like they hold memories in their stones and their air." "Totally," I agreed, my gaze fixed on the horizon. "I have a place like that. An old bookstore back in my hometown. My dad used to take me every Saturday. It smelled like old paper and coffee, and it felt like a sanctuary." I hadn't thought about that bookstore in years, not with such vivid detail, but his words had unlocked it. That's where I first fell in love with stories, with the idea of other worlds. He turned to me then, his eyes searching mine. "It's good to have those anchors, isn't it? Things that remind you of where you came from, who you are." I nodded slowly. "And sometimes, things that remind you of who you want to be." The words felt bigger than I intended, carrying a quiet truth about my own journey, my own search for purpose and connection. He held my gaze for a long moment, and I felt that invisible barrier begin to waver. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that taking one more step would mean a free fall, but somehow it didn't feel terrifying, not entirely. "Hudson," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. "Can I ask you something personal?" My breath hitched. "Yeah, of course." He looked back out at the ocean, his hands clasped loosely between his knees. "That morning, on my couch, when you woke up and I was too close." He paused, and I braced myself. This was it. The conversation I'd both dreaded and longed for. "What did you think? What did you feel?" My heart was thumping a rhythm against my ribs that surely he could hear. It was a simple question, but loaded with 1,000 possibilities. It demanded honesty, vulnerability. I was surprised," I admitted, choosing my words carefully, "and a little disoriented. My first thought was, what the hell just happened?" I chuckled, a nervous, self-deprecating sound. But then, I don't know, it wasn't unpleasant. It felt surprisingly natural, actually, even comforting in a weird way. I risked a glance at him, but he was still staring straight ahead, his profile etched against the darkening sky. But I also felt confused, like, is this a mistake? Did I misread something? What does he think is happening? I took a deep breath, the salty air filling my lungs. I've had my fair share of messed up mornings after a night out, and they usually come with a healthy dose of regret or awkwardness. But that wasn't it. It was different. It felt tender, almost. I finally turned fully to him, reaching out to lightly touch his arm. "And it made me wonder about you, about what you were feeling." He turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting mine. The setting sun cast long shadows, but I could see the sincerity, the slight apprehension in their depths. I I felt a lot of things, he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. Part of it was just pure instinct, I guess. I fell asleep, and then I woke up, and you were just there. And it felt good. Really good. He shifted, turning his body slightly towards me. I'm not usually one for grand gestures, or even small accidental ones like that. I tend to keep a pretty tight lid on things. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I was starting to recognize. I've always been careful, Hudson. Maybe too careful. After my last relationship, it didn't end well. It left a pretty big mark. And for a long time, I just stopped letting people in. Not past a certain point, anyway. My chest tightened. Here it was. The crack in the armor, the first real glimpse into the submerged city. I listened intently, not interrupting, just letting him speak, letting his words hang in the cool evening air. He continued, his voice now a low, even tone. He was volatile, charming, yes, but also really manipulative. And I was so caught up in the idea of being loved, of finally having someone, that I ignored all the red flags. I let him chip away at my self-worth until there wasn't much left. It took me years to truly untangle myself from that, to remember who I was before him. He paused, taking a slow, shaky breath. And ever since, I've been terrified of repeating that, of letting myself be that vulnerable again, of trusting someone with my heart only for them to, well, break it. My heart ached for him. I saw the raw pain, the lingering scars in his eyes. It was a story I knew well, in different forms. We all carried our baggage, our past hurts, that shaped our present fears. I get that, I said, my voice gentle. Completely. It takes a lot to build yourself back up after something like that. It makes you put walls up, right? To protect yourself. He nodded, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, as if he hadn't expected me to understand so deeply. Exactly. And for so long, those walls felt necessary, safe. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I felt a jolt of connection that went straight to my core. But then you came along, and suddenly those walls feel heavy, like they're holding me back more than they're protecting me. He reached out, his hand gently covering mine on the bench. His touch was warm, comforting, a silent promise. That morning on the couch, when I woke up and you were there, and I just stayed. It wasn't calculated, Hudson. It was just this overwhelming feeling of wanting to be close to you. And in that moment, for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel afraid. I just felt a quiet joy, a sense of peace. My eyes welled up unexpectedly. His honesty was a balm, a revelation. It wasn't just physical proximity, it was emotional, a sign of something much deeper than a casual attraction. It was a yearning for connection, a breaking down of barriers that he had held on to for so long. That means a lot, I whispered, squeezing his hand. To hear you say that. I knew it was my turn now, to reciprocate, to show him that I understood, that I wasn't going to shy away from his vulnerability. I've had my own share of walls too, I began, looking out at the endless ocean, gathering my thoughts. After college, I dated someone for a few years. It was comfortable, safe in its own way, but it wasn't passionate. It was more like we were just going through the motions, following a script for what a relationship should be. I took a deep breath, and I realized eventually that I was settling. I was afraid of being alone, I think, afraid of putting myself out there again after some earlier heartbreaks that really knocked me for a loop. So I stayed in something that was just lukewarm. And when it finally ended, it wasn't dramatic, it was just a fizzle. But it left me feeling hollow, like I'd wasted years, and worse, like I hadn't been true to myself or to him by pretending to be content. He listened intently, his gaze unwavering, his thumb stroking the back of my hand gently. That small gesture was more comforting than any words could have been. So after that, I continued, I pulled back from everything, from dating, from really letting anyone in close. I focused on work, on myself, told myself I needed to be whole, completely independent, before I could even think about sharing my life with someone else. And that's been good, in a lot of ways. I've grown, I've learned a lot about myself. But it also gets lonely, really lonely. I turned to him, my voice thick with emotion. And then you came along. And that first night on the couch, that morning, it completely upended everything. It was like a splash of cold water, a reminder that there's this whole other dimension to life, this possibility of connection that I'd almost forgotten. And frankly, I confessed, a small, genuine smile forming on my lips, it scared the hell out of me, because it felt so real, so immediate, like my heart just recognized something in yours and it wasn't waiting for my brain to catch up. He smiled back, a warm, tender smile that reached his eyes. I know that feeling, he murmured, like the universe just decided to throw a wrench in your perfectly organized plans. Exactly, I laughed, a genuine, unburdened laugh. The tension that had been building between us, the unspoken questions, the cautious circling, began to dissolve. It was replaced by a sense of lightness, a feeling of shared understanding and mutual respect for each other's vulnerabilities. So, I said, leaning in slightly, the couch incident. It wasn't an accident, then, not really, for you? He shook his head, his smile deepening. No, not entirely. It was an impulse. A hopeful impulse, maybe. I just wanted to be closer to you, even if it was just in my sleep. He squeezed my hand again, and waking up next to you, even just platonically, felt like coming home. The simplicity and raw honesty of his words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Coming home. It was a sentiment that echoed deep within my own soul. I had spent so long feeling rootless, searching for a place to truly belong, and here, with him, under the vast, ancient sky, I felt a flicker of that very possibility. We sat there for a long time, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in ever-deepening shades of purple and gold. The air grew colder, but the warmth between us was palpable, radiating from our joined hands, from the shared intimacy of our confessions. "Thank you for telling me all that," I finally said, my voice soft. It means a lot to me that you trust me enough to share your story." "Thank you for listening," he replied, his eyes reflecting the last rays of sunlight, "and for sharing yours. It makes me feel less alone, knowing you get it." "We're definitely not alone in this," I agreed, thinking of all the people who carry their pasts like invisible shields. "It's just hard to put them down." "It is," he admitted, then added, "but maybe, with the right person, it's worth the risk." His gaze held mine, and in that moment, the barrier between us didn't just waver, it disintegrated completely. There was an unspoken understanding, a silent agreement that we were both willing to take that risk, to explore this burgeoning connection with open hearts, despite the fears and scars of the past. We talked a bit more about our fears, our hopes for the future, the things we were looking for in a partner. It wasn't a formal interrogation, but a natural, flowing conversation that dove deeper into the emotional and relational complexities we both harbored. We discussed what commitment meant to us, the importance of communication, the desire for a genuine partnership built on trust and respect. He spoke about his desire for stability, for someone who could be a true anchor in his life, not someone who would make him feel like he was constantly walking on eggshells. I shared my longing for an emotional connection that went beyond surface-level attraction, someone who saw me, truly saw Hudson, not just the persona I often presented to the world. We found common ground in so many areas, our values aligning in ways that felt both surprising and incredibly right. As darkness fully descended and the first stars began to pepper the inky sky, he finally stirred. "We should probably head back. It's going to be a long drive." Reluctantly, I pulled my hand from his, feeling the immediate loss of contact, but as we stood up, he gently placed his arm around my waist, pulling me closer. It wasn't a demanding gesture, but a tender, protective one. I leaned into his warmth, feeling a sense of belonging I hadn't experienced in years. The drive back was quieter than the one out, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was a comfortable, contented silence, filled with the resonance of our shared vulnerability. Every now and then, I'd glance over at him, his profile illuminated by the dashboard lights, and I'd feel a rush of affection, a sense of gratitude for this man who was slowly, patiently, letting me into his world, and allowing me to invite him into mine. When we finally pulled up to my apartment building, the city was asleep, or at least in that quiet, pre-dawn hush. He turned off the engine, plunging us into comfortable darkness, save for the faint glow of a street lamp. "Thank you for today," I said, my voice soft, feeling the weight of the day's revelations settle into a deep, peaceful calm within me, for taking me there, and for everything. He reached out, his hand gently cupping my cheek. His thumb stroked my skin, sending shivers down my spine. "No, Hudson, thank you for listening, for understanding, and for not running away." His eyes were serious, vulnerable. "I know this is a lot, and I know I don't usually share like that, but with you, it just feels right." My heart swelled. I knew exactly what he meant. Sometimes you just meet someone, and the floodgates open, not because you plan it, but because they somehow create a safe harbor for the torrent of your feelings. "It feels right for me, too," I confessed, my voice barely a whisper. "More right than anything has felt in a very long time." He leaned in slowly, giving me time to react, to pull away if I wanted to. But I didn't want to. I met him halfway, closing the small distance between us. His lips were soft, hesitant at first, then growing more confident as I responded. It wasn't a passionate, demanding kiss, but a slow, tender exploration, full of the unspoken confessions of the day, of the fears acknowledged, and the hopes ignited. It was a kiss that tasted of salty air and quiet promises, of shared histories, and the brave decision to look towards a future, together. When we finally broke apart, breathless and a little shaky, his forehead rested against mine. "Hudson," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion, I think I'm falling for you." My eyes fluttered open, meeting his. The confession hung in the air, beautiful and terrifying. It was the confirmation I'd longed for, the validation that this connection was real, deep, and mutual. "I think I'm falling for you too," I admitted, a joyous ache blooming in my chest. The words felt liberating, a weight lifted. He pulled back just enough to look at me, a soft, amazed smile gracing his lips. "Good," he murmured, before leaning in for another, sweeter kiss, a silent reaffirmation of the tender, complicated, incredibly hopeful space we had just stepped into. That night, for the first time in weeks, I didn't just sleep on my own bed. I slept with a lightness in my heart, a feeling of having finally unpacked some of my own history, and having been trusted with his. The walls hadn't completely crumbled, not yet, but a significant door had been opened, and for the first time I felt truly ready to walk through it, hand in hand with him into whatever came next. The coffee in my hand was lukewarm, mirroring the lingering chill that had settled between Leo and me over the past few days. It wasn't a fight, not in the screaming, door-slamming sense, but more like a subtle, pervasive quietness. A silence that hummed with unspoken things, making the air in Leo's apartment feel thicker than usual. We'd been together for months now, past the initial whirlwind, past the intoxicating newness, and into the rich, complex territory where real relationships live or die. I sat on the edge of the very couch where this whole crazy thing started, my gaze tracing the faint wear on the armrest. It felt like a lifetime ago, waking up to find Leo's face just inches from mine, his soft breath on my cheek, an accidental intimacy that had shattered every single one of my carefully constructed walls. Now those walls were back up, albeit in a more subtle, internal way. Leo was across the room, meticulously watering a small fern on his bookshelf. His back was to me, and the set of his shoulders looked a little tighter than usual. I knew what this was, what this quiet tension represented. It was the unspoken question that had been hovering like a storm cloud, growing heavier with each passing day. Where were we going? And more specifically, where did I want to go? I'd been so good at living in the moment, at enjoying the easy laughter, the comforting presence, the way his hand found mine so naturally. But lately, moments of future talk would pop up. A passing comment about next year's vacation plans, a friend's engagement party, even just a casual, "We should really get a new rug for this living room," from Leo. And each time I'd felt a small, almost imperceptible flinch inside me. A part of me, the old Hudson, the one who'd always kept an escape route in mind, would instinctively pull back. It wasn't that I didn't want a future with Leo. God, I did. More than I'd ever wanted anything. It was just terrifying. The sheer weight of that kind of commitment, the idea of truly, fully entwining my life with another person, laying all my cards on the table with no guarantees. My past relationships had all ended with a whimper, or sometimes a bang, but always with me finding a way out before things got too serious. I'd told myself it was self-preservation, protecting my heart from the inevitable heartbreak. But with Leo, the thought of losing him felt worse than any heartbreak I'd imagined before, and that, paradoxically, made me want to run even faster. "Everything all right?" I finally asked, my voice sounding a little too loud in the quiet room. Leo stiffened slightly, then slowly turned. His eyes, usually warm and expressive, held a hint of weariness. "Yeah, Hudson, just thinking." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. We were both masters of the unspoken, especially when it came to difficult conversations. We'd learned to read each other's moods, anticipate needs, but sometimes that intuitive understanding became a trap, allowing us to avoid truly vocalizing our deeper fears. He walked over to the window, gazing out at the city streets below. It was a gray, overcast day, matching my mood. "I feel like we're treading water, you know," he said, his voice low. "Like we're just existing in this space without really moving forward." My stomach clenched. This was it. The conversation I'd been dreading, and secretly, desperately wanting. "What do you mean, moving forward?" I asked, playing dumb even though I knew exactly what he meant. He turned to face me then, his expression serious. "Hudson, we've been together for 8 months. We practically live together. Most of my stuff is at your place, most of your stuff is here. We spend every weekend together, every free evening. We know each other's deepest fears and stupidest quirks. But we haven't actually talked about what this is or where it's going. Not really." He was right. We'd skirted around it, hinted at it, made inside jokes about it, but never truly sat down and articulated it. And that was on me. He'd dropped enough breadcrumbs, enough gentle nudges, for me to know he was ready for more. I was the one who kept picking up the breadcrumbs and putting them back in the bag. "I know," I mumbled, feeling a flush creep up my neck. I hated feeling called out, especially by Leo, who was usually so patient and understanding. "Look," he continued, his voice softer now, sensing my discomfort. He came and sat beside me on the couch, but not too close. The space between us felt significant. "I'm not asking for a grand proposal or a 5-year plan. I need to know we're on the same page, that we're both in this, fully, that we both see a future where we're together. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. The whole messy, beautiful thing." He reached out and gently took my hand, his thumb stroking the back of my knuckles. His touch was warm, familiar, comforting, and yet, in this moment, it also felt like a question, a plea. I looked at our intertwined hands, then up at his face. His eyes were what? Earnest, vulnerable. He was laying himself bare, and it was my turn to do the same. This was the moment of truth. Either I leaned in, or I pulled away, potentially shattering what we had. My mind raced, a torrent of fears and hopes clashing within me. The old voices whispered doubts. What if it doesn't work out? What if you get hurt? What if you're not enough? But then another voice, quieter but stronger, rose above the din. It was Leo's laugh, the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching, the feeling of his arms around me on a cold night, the simple, profound peace of being with him. Leo, I started, my voice a little hoarse. I know I haven't been great at this, at talking about the future. It's not because I don't want it with you. It's because I want it so much that it scares the hell out of me. He squeezed my hand gently, silently urging me to continue. I've never felt this way about anyone before, I confessed, the words tasting raw and unfamiliar on my tongue. This sense of belonging, like truly belonging, like I've finally found my person. And that's a beautiful thing, but it's also terrifying. Because if I let myself truly believe it, truly invest everything, then the thought of losing it, of losing you, it just paralyzes me. He listened intently, his gaze unwavering, understanding dawning in his eyes. My whole life I've had this escape hatch mentality, I continued, feeling a surprising ease now that I'd started. The dam had broken. Always an exit strategy, always one foot out the door. It was easier to leave before I got left, to protect myself from ever feeling truly devastated. And with you, I can't do that anymore. I don't want to do that anymore. But it's a muscle I haven't used, this muscle of trust, of full commitment. And it's hard. A small, knowing smile touched Leo's lips. I get it, Hudson. I really do. You're not the only one who's been hurt before. We all carry our baggage. But the thing about baggage is, you can either let it weigh you down, or you can unpack it, deal with it, and then decide what to keep and what to leave behind. He shifted on the couch, turning more fully towards me, his hand now resting gently on my jawline. His touch was electric, familiar, grounding. I'm not asking you to shed all your fears overnight. That's not fair, and it's not realistic. I'm just asking you to lean into the possibility. To trust that maybe, just maybe, this time it's different. That you're not alone in this. That whatever comes, we face it together. His words, spoken so calmly and with such genuine affection, started to untangle the knots in my chest. He wasn't judging me. He was simply offering his hand, his steady presence, and his unwavering belief in us. I want to lean in, Leo, I said, my voice barely a whisper. More than anything I want to. I need to figure out how to silence the old voices, how to truly believe that this is real, and that it's worth the risk. He leaned closer, his eyes searching mine. It is real, Hudson, and it is worth the risk. For me, you're worth every single risk. And then he kissed me. It wasn't a passionate, urgent kiss, but a slow, tender, deeply meaningful one. A kiss that conveyed understanding, acceptance, and a quiet promise. It tasted of coffee and forgiveness and a future that suddenly didn't seem so terrifying. It felt like coming home. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine, his breath mingling with mine. So, he murmured, a hint of his usual playful charm returning, does this mean you're ready to officially stake your claim on half of my closet space? I laughed, a genuine, relieved laugh that bubbled up from deep within me. It might, I said, pulling back just enough to look at him, a wide smile spreading across my face. It might just mean that. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking, really talking, not just about the vague future, but about the practicalities, the fears, the hopes, the compromises. We talked about how we'd manage our separate apartments, our finances, our families. We discussed how to make time for each other amidst busy schedules, how to navigate disagreements, how to keep the spark alive years down the road. It wasn't always easy. And sometimes a new fear would rear its head, but this time, I didn't push it away. I voiced it, and Leo listened. And together, we found solutions, or at least strategies, to approach them. He told me about his own anxieties, the fear of being too much, of not being enough, of losing his independence. He admitted that my initial reticence had sometimes made him doubt if I truly wanted him. Hearing his vulnerabilities made mine feel less isolating. It highlighted the beautiful, messy symmetry of our individual struggles and our shared desires. We weren't just two people falling in love, we were two people choosing to build something together, acknowledging the inherent difficulties, but committed to the process. You know, Leo said later, as we sat curled up on the couch, the sun finally breaking through the clouds, casting a golden glow across the living room. That morning, when you woke up on my couch and I was too close, I remember thinking, oh no, I've screwed this up. I was so mortified. I chuckled, resting my head on his shoulder. I remember thinking, who is this gorgeous man? And why is he invading my personal space? He squeezed me tighter. But then, you didn't bolt. You actually seemed intrigued. I was, I admitted. I felt this pull, even then, this strange, undeniable comfort, despite the awkwardness. It was like I'd just woken up in exactly the right place, even if I hadn't planned on being there. Me too, he whispered, his voice soft. I knew even then that there was something different about you, something that made me want to get closer, not just physically, but in every way. That evening, we decided to cook dinner together. A simple meal, but it felt significant. We moved around the kitchen with an ease that spoke volumes, a familiar dance of reaching for spices, chopping vegetables, stirring pots. There was no more tension, just a comfortable, humming energy. I found myself instinctively leaning into his space, my back brushing his as I reached for a plate, his arm wrapping around my waist for a brief, sweet moment as he passed by. The physical closeness that had once been a surprise, an unexpected intimacy born of circumstance, was now a conscious, cherished choice. As we ate, sitting at his small kitchen table, the conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about mundane things, our day at work, a funny video he'd seen online, plans for the weekend. But underneath it all, there was a new layer of understanding, a fresh sense of security. The quiet promise we'd made to each other earlier that day resonated in every shared glance, every gentle touch. I was thinking, I said, swirling the last bit of wine in my glass, maybe we should look at getting a bigger place. You know, eventually, one that feels like ours, not just yours or half mine. Leo's eyes widened, a slow smile spreading across his face. Are you serious? Never been more serious, I confirmed, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over me. The words, once so terrifying to even contemplate, now felt utterly natural, exciting. He reached across the table, taking my hand in his. Hudson, he said, his voice thick with emotion. That's incredible. It's time, I replied, squeezing his hand. Time to stop treading water. Time to really dive in. That night, as we lay in his bed, tangled together in a way that felt utterly natural and completely right, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The anxieties hadn't completely vanished. I knew they probably never would. But they no longer held me hostage. They were just whispers, easily drowned out by the steady beat of Leo's heart against my ear, by the reassuring weight of his arm around me. I thought about that first morning, waking up on his couch, disoriented, a stranger's face so close to mine. It had been an accidental closeness, a moment of vulnerability forced upon me. But it had also been an invitation to let someone in, to explore a connection that felt both scary and exhilarating. And now, all these months later, that accidental closeness had blossomed into a profound, intentional intimacy. I shifted slightly, propping myself up on an elbow to look at him in the dim light. He was fast asleep, his features relaxed, his breath even. He looked so peaceful, so handsome. I reached out and gently traced the line of his jaw, then tucked a stray curl behind his ear. My heart swelled with a feeling so powerful, so encompassing, it took my breath away. It wasn't just love, though it was certainly that. It was also gratitude, relief, and a deep, abiding sense of home. It was the feeling of finally, truly, letting my guard down, not just with him, but with myself. I lay back down, snuggling closer, fitting myself against him like a missing puzzle piece. This wasn't just a couch or a bed or an apartment. This was us. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't looking for an escape hatch. I was exactly where I wanted to be, right here, wrapped in Leo's arms, ready to face whatever came next, together. The quiet promise we'd made earlier wasn't a burden. It was a foundation. And on that foundation, I knew we could build anything. And the thought, instead of terrifying me, filled me with an exhilarating, profound joy. I closed my eyes, a soft, contented smile on my face, and drifted off to sleep, finally, truly, home.